and welcome to today's lecture on Amenemhat III. I'm your professor, Dr. Rob Steffen, and today we'll be taking a deep dive into a particular pharaoh of the Middle Kingdom. Now, Amenemhat's an interesting choice here, because if you had to choose the most famous, or the most powerful, or the most influential leader of the Middle Kingdom, it would almost certainly be his dad, Senusret III. But Amenemhat ruled for just as long, and he's left behind a vast array of artifacts and monuments that are just perfect for assessing the evolving role and conception of kingship during this very crucial period of Egyptian history. So, if you're interested in showing the world how you really look, journey with me as we investigate Amenemhat III, Shepherd of the People. To really understand the reign of Amenemhat III and what he reveals about kingship during this time, it's important to put the whole thing in context. Remember, we're dealing with the Middle Kingdom here, lasting from about 2055 BCE to 1650 BCE, a time that's often considered the golden age of Egyptian art, and especially literature. Egypt's already gone through one downturn, the First Intermediate Period, and partially as a result, conceptions of the pharaoh have been evolving. And it's within this context that Amenemhat III is born to and rules with his father, the mighty Senusret III. Senusret III is commonly known as the most powerful king of the entire Middle Kingdom, and people would point to his reign, along with Amenemhat III's, as the golden age of the Middle Kingdom. The reasons for that are that all the things we've been talking about in this course, strong centralized rule by the pharaoh, foreign economic and military expeditions, a fluorescence of art and architecture and literature, and strong defenses against any external invasions, they were all in place during the reign of Senusret III and Amenemhat III. Senusret III certainly played the role of strong royal leader. His expeditions into Canaan, modern-day Israel or Palestine, and into Nubia, modern-day Sudan, are well recorded in his own time and by later authors. During one of these Nubian campaigns, Senusret erected a stela documenting his conquests. "I have made my boundary further south than my father's. I have added to what was bequeathed me. As for any son of mine who shall maintain this border with my majesty has made, he is my son born to my majesty. The true son is he who champions his father, who guards the border of his begetter. But he who abandons it, who fails to fight for it, he is not my son. He was not born to me." Wow, those are some lofty standards to live up to. Senusret's accomplishments were so legendary that the Greeks and Romans thought that the guy basically conquered the entire world. Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, thought he conquered Ethiopia and some of Europe. Diodorus Siculus, writing several centuries later, thought he conquered the entire dang world. Now, we know that these are exaggerations, but they do show the reputation that Senusret III left behind. Our main focus today is the son of Senusret III, a guy by the name of Amenemhat III. He was part of the 12th dynasty in the Middle Kingdom and ruled for a whopping 46 years, from 1860 to 1814 BCE. Now, if this sounds improbably long, it's because most scholars believed he ruled with his father, what we call a co-regency, for the first 20 years of his reign. This was a particularly prevalent feature of the Middle Kingdom, and it helped ensure a smooth and peaceful transition from one pharaoh to the next. So one of the big questions we've got is basically, did Amenemhat live up to the lofty expectations of his father? Well, it's somewhat tough to tell.
So on the one hand, we just don't have evidence for Egypt losing control over their extensive southern border. On the other hand, there's not that much evidence for expansion either, just a single inscription in Nubia and another concerning expedition to the land of Punt.
What we do have is a lot of evidence for economic activity. Amenemhat made numerous journeys into the eastern desert in search of valuable minerals. In the Wadi al-Hudi, in the southern part of the eastern desert, Amenemhat brought back precious minerals such as amethyst. Further north, but also in the eastern desert, at the Wadi Hammamat, he sent expeditions to recover quartz and gold and high-quality stone for sculptural carving.
So what we see with Amenemhat III is that he seems to be more concerned with a booming economy than with flexing military muscle. We can also see that the eastern desert continues to be a valuable place for economic mining activities. And the inscriptions left at places like the Wadi Hammamat provide valuable evidence for reconstructing Egypt's ancient history.
In addition to the mining activities in the eastern desert, Amenemhat III spent a significant amount of time on building projects in the Fayum region. The Fayum was an oasis, about 100 kilometers southwest of modern-day Cairo. In antiquity, life in the Fayum oasis centered on the massive Lake Moeris. While any consistent source of water outside the Nile River valley and delta had always been an important center for habitation in ancient Egypt, Lake Moeris played a particularly prevalent role due to its massive size, more than 20 miles in diameter, and its proximity to the Nile River, which provided further possibilities for irrigation and transportation.
During the 12th dynasty, pharaohs began work on Lake Moeris, turning it from a natural lake into a fortified reservoir for fresh water during times of drought. Amenemhat III went one step further, cutting a massive canal between the lake and the Nile River. The distance between this looks especially long today, but in antiquity, the flow of the Nile would have brought the two much closer together. Now, Amenemhat's project, called Mer Wer in Egyptian, translates as the Great Canal. And this title, Mer Wer, is where later Greeks, and us today, get the word Moeris, which is the name of the lake, Mer Wer, Moeris.
The canal itself was approximately 10 miles long, and it maintained a consistent slope of 1 to 10, allowing for the consistent, regulated flow of waters from the Nile to the lake. This is what allowed for the storage of water in times of drought. 13 billion cubic meters of water to be exact. This also allowed for large-scale irrigation projects around Lake Moeris, which became an important source for grain in ancient Egypt.
Amenemhat's project was so important in the region that he was worshipped by later Egyptians as a local god called Mer Wer or Moeris. And this region, the Fayum, played a particularly important role in later Greco-Roman Egypt, mainly because it produced grain that played a major role in feeding the Hellenistic and Roman empires. Moreover, because the lake eventually shrank, the ancient villages of the region have been immaculately preserved and provide some of our best evidence for daily life in ancient Egypt.
So the Mer Wer, or Great Canal, linking the Nile River to Lake Moeris in the Fayum, was a complete success. It improved the economy, increased food production, and preserved water in times of drought. But not all of Amenemhat's projects would turn out so well, especially his rather sad attempt at a pyramid.
Amenemhat III decided to build his pyramid at the site of Dashur, the same site where the 4th dynasty pharaoh Snefru built one of his pyramids. 2 of his pyramids, actually. Now, if you remember, Snefru's pyramids had their own problems. He had one collapsed pyramid, and his first pyramid at Dashur needed an angle adjustment halfway through. But he eventually got it right, and his red pyramid still stands as an iconic, impressive structure. Actually, the first complete true pyramid in Egyptian history. Amenemhat's pyramid, known as the Black Pyramid, can't make any such claims.
Today, the Black Pyramid looks, well, not great. And indeed, the term Black Pyramid was given due to the fact that it looked like a dark, decaying mound of rubble. Middle Kingdom pyramids were built of mud brick instead of stone, and just the outer part would have been finished with white limestone. Interestingly, we do still have the pyramidion, the final finely carved capstone to the pyramid. And we have the underground chambers that still held a sarcophagus and canopic jars. But Amenemhat himself, his actual body, was never buried there. Groundwater eventually seeped in, causing much of the structure to collapse into a pile of mud, just like you see today.
Instead, Amenemhat III moved the construction of his mortuary complex to the Fayum region, the same place as his Meroe, Great Canal. And he built a new pyramid and temple at the site of Hawara. Even though it too looks like a big pile of crap today, in antiquity, it was actually quite the engineering feat. It had all sorts of defense mechanisms against robbers, trap doors and false passages, and rooms where you'd get locked in if you tried to enter. It sounds like something out of a movie. And the mortuary temple next door became famous for its complexity. Herodotus called it a labyrinth. Think of the story of the Minotaur. Due to its ornate combination of passages, galleries, and courtyards.
So we get an interesting situation when we look at Middle Kingdom pyramid building. Clearly this isn't on the scale of the Old Kingdom. But at the same time, pharaohs are still making the effort to build monumental tombs. And now they're taking better precautions regarding the protection of the king in the afterlife. But while pyramids sent messages on a grand, monumental scale, the sculptural program of King Amenemhat III sent far more subtle messages on a much smaller scale.
Remember that in the Old Kingdom, pharaohs, regardless of their age, portrayed themselves as idealized, strong, and youthful men. We can see that in the statues of Khufu, and Khafre, and Menkaure, the builders of the pyramids at Giza. But with Amenemhat in the Middle Kingdom, we see pharaohs do a mix of things. Sometimes they portray themselves as idealized young men. But sometimes they portray themselves closer to how they actually looked.
Here we can see an Opha calcite statue of Amenemhat III. And while the quality might not be up to Old Kingdom standards, the representation of the king would feel at home. He's young and idealized, just the way an Old Kingdom king would be portrayed. This statuette shows a similar youthful depiction of King Amenemhat III.
In this statue head of Amenemhat, however, we see an entirely different depiction. Lines crease his face, his cheekbones protrude, and he has a sense of tiredness almost, not previously seen in the pharaohs of the Old Kingdom. And in this granodiorite statue, it shows a similar expression. Creased lines, large ears, protruding cheekbones, and a slight frown. Now most people would interpret this not simply as an artistic movement, but rather as a way for the pharaoh to depict his care for his people. He takes the weight of his people upon his shoulders, and there's a level of exhaustion in caring for his entire land. The life of Amenemhat III shows us a distinct change in the style of kingship from the godlike kings of the Old Kingdom. Now that's not to say that the Middle Kingdom kings weren't divine. They certainly still thought of themselves as gods. But they also wanted to convey a deeper message about their care for their people. Statuary, like we've just seen, was one way to show the pharaoh's care for his people. And a shift in construction efforts away from the pyramids, although they still existed in a smaller form, and towards mining and infrastructure projects also signified things that everyone could benefit from. So if you're looking to show your love for the people, make sure you learn a few of these lessons from Amenemhat.